Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Recovering the Sacred. I'm James Barbieri, Program Coordinator here at the Party Center, and your host for today. Let me just very briefly, before we begin, remind you to mute your microphone to ensure good quality audio. A reminder as well that the chat is open, so feel free to use it throughout the session to share any thoughts or ideas with the rest of the group. And that this session is recorded for archival purposes, and that you should receive the recording to this session in a few days. So today we have the honor to be joined by Anne Baring, who will be discussing the loss and recovery of the sacred. Anne is a Jungian analyst and an author with a PhD in wisdom studies at Ubiquity University in 2018. Her books include, with Jules Cashford, The Myth of the Goddess, Evolution of an Image, with Andrew Harvey, The Mystic Vision and the Divine Feminine, with Dr. Sheila Elworthy, Soul Power, An Agenda for the Conscious Humanity, and also a book for children, the book, The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time. The ground of all of her work is a deep interest in the spiritual, mythological, shamanic, and artistic traditions of different cultures. Before that, we suggest that everyone takes our usual minute of reflection before the speaker begins to engage with the sacred. To assist us, Anne has selected a piece by Thomas Tallis called Spem in Alium, which I'll play just now. Great. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Anne. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Now, as I'm very ancient, greetings to everybody. I'm going to read my talk. Jesus said that men do not put new wine in new bottles, lest the bottles break and the wine is lost. In the second part of this presentation, I will explore aspects of the new wine that is flowing into our world from different sources and the new bottles that are holding it. But first, I will explore when, where, and how we lost a vital image of the sacred, or a vital aspect of the sacred. We are at present imprisoned in an outworn image of God and in a secular view of reality, which has cut us off from the earth, the cosmos, and our own soul. For increasing numbers, religion has become meaningless. God has been pronounced dead, an outgrown superstition. But while the image of the sacred may die, the sacred itself cannot die. After an interval marked by cultural and social disintegration, a new image may appear, unheralded from the depths of the human soul. It's not moving, James. Is there any problem there?
Not on my side. Try maybe the mouse, like clicking the mouse.
No, it was working before. I think, should I? I didn't see the little cup to start the thing. It just came up with this straight away, so to speak.
Try maybe if you press the ESC button and then maybe come back into it, see if that works.
Which one?
The ESC, the top left button on the keyboard, just to
escape button.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. I think I
Maybe
better do stop share, hadn't I?
Yeah, I think it's best to stop share and then.
Oh, dear technology. Okay, so I start share screen again. Is that right, James?
Try
Yeah, that's fine.
on the presentation itself. Are you able to change now on your screen the slides?
I can't see the presentation now.
Okay.
I can just see me.
Okay.
Well, if you press the share screen again, we may be able to go from there.
It comes straight up with that. It doesn't come up with a cup or anything. That's what is worrying
Can you
me.
change slides now?
No, it's not
The-
budging.
With arrows or the click?
I'm doing the arrows. I haven't had this trouble before. I don't know what's happening.
Not sure. So I've just requested control, just to see if I can help you
I
out.
click approve.
Yes, please. Oh. Should we share our screen again? Apologies for this. We did test it before.
What?
No, just telling everyone that we did test it before.
We did. Okay, now it's done. That's better. Now I press the little cup. Yes.
That's right.
And now it should be okay. All right.
Perfect.
I'll go on. Hopefully it's all right. From the first stirrings of conscious awareness, we've sought relationship with the cosmos, gazing in wonder at the stars, naming the constellations, minutely charting the rising and setting of the moon and the sun, imagining a divine intelligence that has created the beauty and marvel of the earth, and longing to communicate with that intelligence. We have created many images of the sacred to draw us closer to the mystery. This longing for relationship reached a new expression in 1969, when the view of our beautiful blue planet from the moon gave us a stunning perspective of our home in the vastness of the universe. This event seems to have initiated a profound experience of transformation, an alchemical process of death and rebirth. We are called to respond to a new consciousness arising deep within the soul of humanity, a consciousness that could become the true savior of our species. We cannot go on as before, believing we are alone in the universe and masters of this planet. This profound process of transformation requires a new image of the sacred, because we are moving into a new era, which is also a new astrological age. I would like to share these words with you, written some years ago by a woman called Suzanne Schaub in a book about the divine feminine called Sophia. That which gives a culture legitimacy is ultimately its underlying concept of God. If this concept does not change, nothing can actually change. No scientific, ecological, or social paradigm shift can take effect as long as the theological paradigm does not change with it. Patriarchy is still the prevailing world order, and if this is to change, we need a new perception of God. Many women, as well as an increasing number of men, no longer accept the traditional image of God because it lacks the feminine. Now, I remember reading a book by Professor Richard Tonnes called The Passion of the Western Mind, published in 1991. And in the epilogue, he writes, "The evolution of the Western mind has been driven by a heroic impulse to forge an autonomous, rational human self by separating it from the primordial unity with nature. But to do this, the masculine mind has been founded on the repression of the feminine, the repression of undifferentiated unitary consciousness, of the participation mystique with nature, a progressive denial of the anima mundi, of the soul of the world, of imagination, emotion, instinct, body, nature, and woman, of all that which the masculine has identified as other." And he goes on to say that to reintegrate the repressed feminine, the masculine must undergo a sacrifice, an ego death. So for this reason, the old image of the sacred I think, is dying in order to allow a new image of the sacred to emerge into consciousness. Alchemy gives us this graphic image of killing the old king, the ruling belief system. The old king personifies an outworn image of spirit and an outworn paradigm of reality, one that has been split off from nature and that needs to be relinquished in order that a new image can emerge from the depths of the soul. Now, I think that for many thousand years, humanity has been on a heroic journey, a slow and arduous journey of discovery, without knowing who we are, where we have come from, or why we are here on this planet, or where we go when we die. The theme of the hero's journey underlies all mythologies which suggest that we have become separated from our home in the divine world and are therefore exiled, fallen, lost, or asleep. They tell us that we need to embark on a quest in order to recover our connection with that world, thereby bringing about our awakening, transformation, and return to the source. Jung was one of the cultural heroes who made the shamanic journey into the unexplored realm of the soul and returned with a treasure that has enriched our culture. This painting is called The Spirit Above a World of War and Technology, very suitable for our time. His lifelong task, as he saw it, was to build a bridge between the material reality that we see and know with our physical senses and the neglected inner dimension of the soul. He introduced the concept of individuation or soul growth that he saw as an evolutionary imperative if we are to survive. In the field of astronomy, Copernicus and Kepler transformed the medieval worldview by displacing the Earth from its position at the center of the solar system. Jung did the same for the modern psyche, displacing the ego or conscious mind from its central position by introducing the concept of a deeper matrix of consciousness to which the conscious mind is related as a child to mother, and out of which, in evolutionary terms, it has emerged. So I've put this diagram of the psyche to give you a rough idea of what I'm talking about. The yellow triangle at the top is the conscious mind or ego. Then comes the personal unconscious, the memories of our own lives, and then the deeper collective unconscious, which is part of nature, and nature is part of the cosmos. And from that depth, Jung said that we can listen to the spirit of the depths if we attune ourselves to it. He realized that as the conscious mind gained more and more autonomy in relation to the deeper matrix of the psyche, the whole superstructure of consciousness has become disengaged from the age-old matrix out of which it has evolved. And he said that consciousness, thus torn from its roots, possesses a Promethean freedom, but it also partakes of the nature of a godless hubris, which I think we can all see now. Now, the supreme task of a civilization has been symbolized in myth by the quest for a priceless treasure. A civilization is inspired and sustained for a certain length of time by its great myths, but eventually the original impetus created by them fades. The treasure is no longer understood to be the creation of a living relationship with a transcendent source, but is projected onto lesser aims, such as the acquisition of power, wealth, and fame. A great sustaining myth emerges from the inner dimension of the soul through the life and example of an extraordinary individual. It then becomes crystallized into belief, religion, dogma. The living relationship with the soul may be lost through the insistence on a collective belief system, and eventually a state of psychic atrophy sets in, where we are out of touch with the soul, where the energy of life turns against itself, where there is no renewal or regeneration, but a death of the creative imagination, such as Ian has so eloquently spoken about and written about. Now, I've introduced this idea from Owen Barfield in his remarkable book, Saving the Appearances, where he defines 3 phases in the evolution of human consciousness. The first phase of the top of original participation, which may have lasted 25 to 50,000 years or far longer, The second phase, which is the solar phase of separation, where there's duality and polarization, where mind and soul become separated, and cosmos, God, and the world are seen as object. And the third phase, which the alchemists call the stellar phase of consciousness, where mind and soul are reunited with the divine ground. And there is conscious participation in an ensouled universe. I think we're currently living near the end of phase 2, poised at the threshold of the third phase of reunion with the divine ground. The alternative is annihilation for our species. We now know that over a time span of many millennia, the image of the sacred changed from the primordial great mother of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras to the many goddesses and gods of the Bronze Age, and finally, in the 3 patriarchal religions, to the image of a monotheistic father god, although in India, the older polytheistic pantheon survived. Throughout these millennia, whatever the religion or the culture, the sacred image gave us a vertical access, keeping us in touch with a divine source or ground of being, instinctively felt to exist. It held society together in a shared belief system, a shared image of the sacred. So we come to phase 1, the great mother of the Paleolithic era. Here are 3 sacred images from the first phase, when the cosmos was imagined as a mother, from whose cosmic womb all forms of life emerged in a continuous cycle of birth, death, and regeneration, thereby unifying creator and creation. For tens of thousands of years, the ground from which life arose and to which it returned was maternal. What we now call cosmos and nature was a living web of relationships ensouled by the Great Mother. Life was an organic, living, and sacred whole, and we were part of that whole. The Milky Way was the starry passage by which souls entered and left this world, and the shamanic journey into non-ordinary states of consciousness was the spiritual experience throughout this long era. As Mary Jane Rust so beautifully explained last weekend, we had a participatory consciousness, different from the one we have now. We lived and died within the being of the Great Mother. The cosmology of this era was a cyclical process of birth, death, and regeneration that arose from the age-old observation of the recurring phases of the moon, its birth as a crescent, its waxing to fullness, and its waning into the 3 days of darkness. For this reason, I call it the lunar era. Just as the stars emerged each night from the darkness of the night sky, so the visible universe was born from the dark mystery of the invisible. Plants, trees, animals, and birds, as well as rocks and rivers, moon, sun, and stars, were all infused with divinity because each and all were part of a living, breathing, connecting web of life, the life of the Great Mother. The hidden dimension of spirit was present in every aspect of the manifest world. And people knew then how to speak to the moon, to the rivers, to the birds and the animals and the trees, something that we have lost, the participatory consciousness that we've lost. Then we move on to this image of the Neolithic Great Mother. Notice the door and the shamanic pathway that leads from this world to the inner world of her greater being. This image comes from Romania and dates to 5500 BCE. Romania was once part of the huge area that the great archaeologist Marija Gimbutas discovered and called the civilization of old Europe, or the civilization of the goddess. This civilization extended from Italy to the Black Sea and included Greece, Romania, and Ukraine, interestingly enough. It was peaceful, egalitarian, and intensely creative, producing magnificent pottery and exquisite gold artifacts. It existed for 3,000 years, from 6,500 until 3,500 BCE, when it was infiltrated and ultimately destroyed by Kurgan tribes descending from the Russian steppes, bringing with them the horse, lethal weapons, and the war chariot. They introduced the patriarchal order sky gods, and the hierarchical organization of society with a warrior leader at the top. Over the next 2 millennia, they spread eastwards through the Middle East, Anatolia, and Persia, as far as India, where they established themselves. You can see this if you look up on Google, the civilization of old Europe. You can see the magnificent pottery that they made. You might be interested in that. It's absolutely marvelous. And it's so fascinating that it included Ukraine. So moving forward, we follow the image of the Neolithic Great Mother as she becomes the great goddesses of the Bronze Age, goddesses such as Isis in Egypt, Inanna in Sumer, and Artemis of Ephesus, all of whom were worshipped as Queen of Heaven and associated with the moon. For many thousands of years, the Great Mother and these great goddesses personified the principle of relationship, the interconnectedness of every aspect of life, and above all, the sacredness of the great web of life that connected nature and cosmos. The primary question of the lunar era was, how should the human community act to be in harmony with the life of the cosmos? Plato, in his Timaeus, was the first to give a name to an all-embracing cosmic entity, which he described as a single living creature that encompasses all the living creatures that are within it. He called it the soul of the cosmos. The priceless legacy of this whole era was the shamanic experience that the cosmos has an inner life, a soul, and that humans could communicate with it and derive their laws from listening to its guidance. The pre-Socratic philosophers Pythagoras and Parmenides were masters of this shamanic incubation, and they took their laws from the inner source of the cosmos. I recommend you to read Peter Kingsley's books if you want to know more about that. So we carry within our soul a very ancient kind of consciousness or experience of life that I call lunar consciousness and associate with the timeless wisdom of the soul. It is an instinctive, feminine, participatory, relational way of knowing, mediated through the heart, enhanced sensory observation and intuition that opens the path between 2 dimensions of reality. We need to reconnect or rediscover this lost consciousness and learn to listen again to what Jung called the spirit of the depths. Now we move on to the solar era, phase 2, and the separation from nature, which has lasted over 4,000 years, from circa 2000 BCE to the present day. We find a cosmology that is radically different from that of the earlier era. It is a cosmology of separation, characterized by dissociation, duality, fragmentation, and polarization, which arose initially from the conflict between cities and nation states. During this era, the Great Father replaced the Great Mother as the sole image of deity. And because of this, we lost the participatory consciousness that we had in the earlier era and the sense that we lived within a sacred order, an insight that has only survived to our time in the indigenous cultures of the world. The focus of this whole era is on the establishment of the patriarchal order, led by male warrior leaders, together with male priesthoods that exist to this day. But it is also about a violent and traumatic separation from the deeper matrix of the soul or psyche, and a severance of our relationship with nature, cosmos, and earth. I think it was in this era that the left brain began to shut down the right one. The rapid growth of the population facilitated the drive for territorial conquest, led by warrior kings who presided over immense empires. There were at least 7 of these, all built on the enslavement of conquered peoples. With this rise of city-states, then empires, came the idea of power over vast numbers of people and how a certain territory belongs to a specific group. Conquering more territory involved killing or enslaving others. Just one note, 10,000 slaves a day were traded on the island of Delos around 400 BC. Just one fact for you to absorb. This new male quest for territory, power, and renown destroyed the older relationship with a harmonious cosmic order. The death and suffering of thousands meant nothing to the psychopathic leaders intent on the acquisition of power, territory, and glory that could be acquired through conquest. As our conscious mind slowly evolved out of the matrix of the primordial collective soul, the sacred image and the mythologies which grew up around it were like an umbilical cord holding us in touch with the foundation of life. But as we moved into the era of the monotheistic transcendent God of the patriarchal religions, the older shamanic relationship with the earth and a living cosmos was gradually lost, and with it, the idea that the whole of nature was sacred, infused with divinity, ensouled. Two immensely powerful and polarizing cosmologies became the major influence on the social, political, and religious history of Western civilization. The first of these was the battle between light and darkness, good and evil, symbolized by the hero's fight with the dragon. This cosmology projected into the world would lead to endless struggles for power. Ultimately, it would lead to the battle to conquer and subjugate nature in the service of man. Nature and the earth were no longer sacred. Man became identified with spirit, or identified himself with spirit, and woman was identified with nature. 4,000 years ago, man assumed a position of dominance over nature and woman's voice was silenced. Her former ancient role as priestess and healer was forbidden, and her sole value consisted in her being the carrier of man's seed. This archaic belief still prevails among the Taliban of Afghanistan. The key theme of the solar era is ascent to the light and repudiation of the darkness associated with nature. The development of the conscious mind in humanity, together with its stupendous cultural and scientific achievements, can be recognized as the evolutionary achievement of the solar era, and above all, the achievement of man. But this achievement was built on the widening chasm between transcendent spirit and nature. And this whole process was closely tied into the invention of writing and the power that literacy gave to an elite group of very powerful rulers and priesthoods who deliberately destroyed the shamanic practices and animistic rituals of the older lunar order. As the image of deity changed from Great Mother to Great Father, and the divine feminine was excluded from the sacred image, our relationship with nature was severed. This led to the gradual de-souling of the world and the crisis that we face now. However, there was a specific time when there is a clear record of the loss of the image of the divine feminine, a loss that originated in the Hebrew religion and was transmitted to Christianity. And I've only recently learned about this in the last 2 years or so. So there was a second polarizing cosmology and a specific myth, the myth of the fall of man, that I believe has contributed more than any other to the total loss of the feminine that Richard Tarnas describes and the crisis that we face now. To understand the significance of this loss, I need to take you back to the first temple in Jerusalem that was founded by Solomon around 1000 BCE, and to the remarkable books of the Old Testament scholar, Dr. Margaret Barker. In these, she describes the enormous change in Hebrew cosmology that took place in 621 BCE during the reign of a King Josiah, when a group of priests called Deuteronomists took control of the first temple in Jerusalem. Prior to this, the Jewish people had worshipped both a goddess and a god, a queen and a king of heaven, who together had created the world. The Queen of Heaven, whose name was Asherah, was worshipped as the Holy Spirit and divine wisdom, and also as the tree of life, a cosmic tree connecting the invisible and visible worlds, whose fruit was the gift of immortality. The Deuteronomists eradicated all trace of the goddess, removing her statue from the temple and that of the great bronze serpent that symbolized her power to regenerate life. They cut down her sacred groves of trees and smashed all images of her. They banished the ancient shamanic rituals of the high priest, who had climbed the steps in the great tower at the back of the temple to commune with the Queen of Heaven and the Holy Spirit. And they replaced these with new rituals based on obedience to Yahweh's law. The making of images was henceforth forbidden. This is perhaps another example of the shutting down of the right hemisphere by the left. They then created the myth of the fall of man, downgrading the goddess into the human figure of Eve and bestowing on her the former title of the goddess, mother of all living. In this way, the Jewish people lost the image of their goddess, leaving Yahweh as the sole creator God. The only place where the teaching and rituals of the first temple survived was in the later mystical teaching of Kabbalah, known as the voice of the dove and the jewels of the heavenly bride. I should add here that Kabbalah is the only tradition in the West that has a union of the male and female aspects of divinity in the Godhead. Now, the story of Eve begins with the appearance of Yahweh in the place of the mother of all living. This shift of power marks a fundamental change in the relationship between humanity and God, the world and God, the world and humanity, and men and women. What it involved ultimately was the rejection of the feminine as a sacred entity. This was from a book called The Story of Eve by John Phillips. Absolutely fascinating book. In this new Christian patriarchal cosmology, Earth is designated a place of exile and punishment for primordial sin. It is no longer sacred. Adam is given dominion over the animals, but he is no longer part of the divine order. He is banished to a world contaminated by the fall and subject to sin, suffering, and death, all introduced into the world by Eve. Since Eve was the primary agent of the fall, she took the blame for our banishment from the Garden of Eden. This led to the unrelenting persecution of women who had the heavy burden of the sin of Eve placed on them by the Christian fathers and generations of Christian priests, culminating in their being tried and condemned to death at the stake by the Inquisition for consorting with the devil. This immensely powerful myth and its literal interpretation are the main root of the misogyny that pollutes our culture to this day, giving rise to a deep unconscious suspicion, even a fear of women, and a consequent desire to control, silence, and even punish them, all of which are explicit in pornography and also in the rape and murder of many women all over the world, but particularly in Europe, I think, and America. From the perspective of our relationship with the earth, this myth and the loss of the goddess and the divine feminine were a disaster. Everything that was once associated with the divine feminine, nature, matter, sexuality, and the whole instinctual aspect of life, was excluded from the sacred. Once again, nature, split off from spirit, was effectively de-souled. We lost the awareness that spirit was active and present in the world, and we lost the sense of living within a sacred order. This myth imprinted us with a negative image of our nature and our presence on this planet, and placed a heavy burden of shame and guilt, particularly sexual guilt, on our shoulders. I can't stress this too much as a therapist that I've listened to many people telling the story of their lives, and many of them had this sense of shame and guilt, and it goes straight back to this myth. And also it leads to the projection of that shame and guilt onto other people, blaming them for whatever it is that we want to blame them for. So it's a very, very powerful myth indeed, and I can't stress it more than what I'm saying now. But I need to mention here the Council of Nicaea, summoned by the Emperor Constantine in 325 CE, which officially created the Christian myth of Jesus as the celibate only Son of God, whose sacrificial death has ensured our salvation and redemption from sin. At the same council, the third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, was also defined as male, so there was no longer a feminine presence in the Godhead. Previously, in both the Hebrew and the Greek world, the Holy Spirit had been feminine. To confirm the divinity of Jesus in 451 CE, the Virgin Mary was declared the God-bearer, or Theotokos. In these two councils, all traces of Jesus's brothers and sisters and his marriage to Mary Magdalene were deleted. The monotheistic cosmology of the three patriarchal religions has led to the situation where the earth is no longer recognized as sacred, and we are confronted with the catastrophic effects of the loss of the divine feminine. From the time of the Crusades, the Christian church in Rome pursued endless wars, conquests, and brutal conversions in the name of its God. It introduced the horror of the Inquisition in the 13th century, which was to last 5 centuries. We have recently acknowledged the evils of slavery, but it was a series of papal bulls from 1493 that gave the European nations permission to invade, capture, subdue, and enslave, this is an actual quote, the indigenous populations, and to seize all their lands and possessions, all in the name of Christ. Because of this lamentable history of conquest and subjugation, so-called Christian civilization has been on the wrong path for over 1,000 years, out of alignment with the earth and the cosmos, out of touch with the teaching of its great founder, although worshipping his image. The deeper layers of the soul, which held the memory of a life of participation in creation and the instinctual awareness of the unity of life governed by divine law, understood for thousands of years through the image of the goddess, were silenced. And the primary mistake in Christian teaching was to split nature from spirit and body from soul. The soul and the instinctive feeling values associated with it were consistently overridden and ignored. The body was despised as sinful, and woman's voice was silenced, and she became subject to man. The most important effect of monotheism, or a single male god, was that nature was split off from spirit. The loss of the goddess meant that nature was no longer sacred because spirit was no longer present within it. We are the inheritors of the dualism embedded in the monotheistic patriarchal religions, which worshipped a creator god whose priests would not tolerate a feminine co-creator and who severed the umbilical cord between nature and spirit. We are faced with the effects of this split today as we belatedly recognize the harm we have done to the planet. Now, when the feminine archetype is unconscious, it manifests as the will to power. This is something that Jung said, and also Marie-Louise von Franz. So I'm saying it here myself. The whole red area is really possession by the shadow. This diagram illustrates what happens when the conscious mind is possessed by the will to power of what Jung named as the shadow. We have seen this in the warlike ethos of the solar era, but it culminates in the last century and the creation of the atomic and hydrogen bomb. The first atomic bomb, detonated in 1945, was hailed as a tremendous scientific achievement. It was followed by the obliteration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it triggered a struggle for power between the United States and the Soviet Union. With the creation of this demonic weapon, we lost our humanity, as Albert Schweitzer observed in 1954 when he received the Nobel Prize for Peace. Now there are 9 nuclear powers, with possibly a 10th. Few people, least of all governments, understand that the creation of nuclear weapons is a crime against the sacred order of life on this planet. And we are now faced with evil on a colossal scale, evil that we have brought into being, or allowed to be brought into being, because we have not begun to comprehend the fact that all life on this planet is sacred. Today, we live in a culture that has given overwhelming emphasis to the rational mind and to technological progress, scientific advance, and political power. It has neglected the feminine value, above all, the deepest longings and innate wisdom of the human heart. Visionary experience has been banished. In such a culture, which is decadent now, the soul is effectively starving. Modern culture is driven by a predatory and rapacious materialism and an ethos of competitive struggle and the pursuit of power, dominance, and control. There is no limit to the evil people will do for money and power. We are now facing the shadow aspect of Western civilization and the effects of having ignored the feminine value for millennia. I will read you this Essene prophecy from 2000 years ago, which was possibly written by Jesus. But there will come a day when the Son of Man will turn his face from his earthly mother and betray her, even denying his mother and his birthright. Then shall he sell her into slavery, and her flesh shall be ravaged, her blood polluted, and her breath smothered. He will bring the fire of death into all the parts of her kingdom, and his hunger will devour all her gifts and leave in their place only a desert. All these things he will do out of ignorance of the law, and as a man dying slowly cannot smell his own stench, so will the Son of Man be blind to the truth, that as he plunders and ravages and destroys his earthly mother, so does he plunder and ravage and destroy himself. For he was born of his earthly mother, and he was one with her, and all that he does to his mother, even so does he do to himself. Every word of this prophecy has come true. Believing ourselves to be separate from and entitled to exploit nature in the interest of our species alone, and having no idea of who we are and why we are on this planet, we have grossly interfered with the harmony of the natural world and are bringing possible extinction, mass extinction upon it, as well as upon ourselves. Now, the split between spirit and nature, which has been for the most part unconscious, has led ultimately to materialist or reductionist science, also known as physicalism or scientism, that came into being over the last 3 centuries and today controls our secular culture, government, the media, and mainstream academic life. From the 17th century, science developed on the foundation of this split. Discarding religion, it focused on matter. With great benefit, I may say. It has brought us enormous benefits through its many discoveries and transformed the conditions of our life on this planet. It has led us to the digital revolution and our astonishing ability to connect with people all over the world, as we are doing now in this talk. However, this materialist view of reality, presented as incontrovertible truth, tells us that we are the only sentient beings in a universe that is without life, consciousness, evolutionary purpose, or meaning. It has banished both God and the soul. It ignores the further potential development of human consciousness and the states of mind that have long been explored in the metaphysical traditions of the East. The rational human mind has virtually replaced God and no longer recognizes a dimension of reality beyond the material universe, nor any form of consciousness transcendent to its own. When the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. We are basically biophysical machines with no free will. These dehumanizing beliefs offer no foundation for morality, which is increasingly vanishing from our world, and no foundation for relationship with and respect for the earth. They uphold the belief, once uttered by Mao Zedong in the Cultural Revolution, that man must conquer nature. Those are his actual words. This bleak cosmology, taught in our schools and universities for over 100 years, has taken on the power and absolutism of an ideology. No image describes it better than this painting of the Cyclops, or one-eyed giant, painted 100 years ago by Odilon Redon. Today, countless millions live their lives in bondage to patriarchal images of God, which are rigid in their authoritarian control of the human spirit, as in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Countless other millions live under the absolute control of their totalitarian governments, as in China and North Korea. We are threatened with the same prospect of digital control by our governments, as we have seen during the last 2 years. We have been reduced, as Yuval Harari has charmingly put it, to no more than hackable animals. Is it surprising that so many people are showing symptoms of mental illness and are driven to drugs and suicide because they feel their lives have no meaning and no value? This absence of meaning leaves them open to indoctrination and control by governments and other international organizations, such as the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. In our heavily censored culture, where no public debate is permitted on such crucially important issues as vaccines and their effects, our voices have been silenced. If you want to understand how easily people can be controlled by governments and acquiesce in this controlling, read a book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism by Matthias Desmet. It explains what happens when we are driven by deliberately engineered fear into a state of collective hypnosis, where we blindly obey what we are told to do by our governments. Those courageous enough to speak up against this indoctrination and control are ostracized and demonized. And I love this image of the frog, one frog jumping out just in time, and the other going to sit there until he's cooked. I thought that was a good image to put with this part of my final bit of my talk. I'm sorry it was so fierce, but this had to be said, and I needed to get it out of my system. I've been sitting on it for 40 years. Thank you very much. At the present time, something of immense significance is happening. We are recovering the image of the sacred, not as something to worship, but as something we are part of. A new cosmology is being born, a new vision of our profound relationship with a conscious, intelligent, living universe. The millennia-old separation of matter and spirit is being healed. There is a new consensus among a growing number of physicists, astrophysicists, and cosmologists that cosmic consciousness and not matter is the primary ground of reality and our own consciousness. In the words of Dr. Eben Alexander, who had an astounding near-death experience, he says, "We are all manifestations of the one mind, the primordial consciousness in which all the events of the universe occur. Instead of seeing ourselves as fallen, sinful creatures, we are beginning to realize that we are cosmic beings as well as human beings. We are part of the cosmos as well as the earth." Now, all this to me is like an annunciation, as in this beautiful painting by Filippo Lippi. The revelation that we are all manifestations of and participants in cosmic mind, part of the earth's life as well as the life of the cosmos, gives me hope that we may rescue ourselves from our predatory and exploitive habits in time to counteract the danger of destroying not only millions more species, but our own as well. It invites us to recognize that we have a future role on this planet in the service of nature and ultimately the cosmos, to know ourselves in our innermost nature as cosmic beings, incarnated here for a purpose, aware of our fundamental divinity. Millennia ago, an initiate of the Orphic mysteries proclaimed, "I am a child of earth and starry heaven." And this, I think, is what we are discovering ourselves to be. Now we can return here to Richard Tarnas's prophetic epilogue in his book, The Passion of the Western Mind. As Jung prophesied, he says, an epochal shift is taking place in the contemporary psyche, a reconciliation between the two great polarities, a union of opposites, a hieros gammus or sacred marriage between the long dominant but now alienated masculine and the long repressed but now ascending feminine. This has been the underlying goal of Western intellectual and spiritual evolution. For the deepest passion of the Western mind, he says, has been to reunite with the ground of its being. The driving impulse of the West's masculine consciousness has been its dialectical quest, not only to realize itself, to forge its own autonomy, but also, finally, to recover its connection with the whole, to differentiate itself from, and then rediscover and reunite with the feminine, with the mystery of life, of nature, and of soul. And this is the great challenge of our time, he continues, the evolutionary imperative for the masculine to enter into a new relationship with the feminine in all its forms. The feminine then becomes not that which must be controlled, denied, and exploited, but rather acknowledged, respected, and responded to for itself, It is recognized not as the objectified other, but rather source, goal, and immanent presence. Now, 50 years ago, I had a visionary dream of a cosmic woman whose form filled the entire space between earth and heaven. This dream was the most awesome experience of my entire life, the awakener of my soul. I was lying flat on the ground, caught in a gigantic net held by two men, and gazing up at the vision of a beautiful, naked, goddess-like figure. In her abdomen was an enormous wheel. Looking up at her and then down at my own body, I saw that I too had a wheel in my abdomen, but it was on the left-hand side. She did not speak, but indicated to me that I was to center my wheel. Being in Jungian analysis at the time, I took this to mean that I needed to become more conscious of her presence and of the divine feminine in general. My search for who she was led me to the Shekinah of Kabbalah, whose titles now, as millennia ago, are divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit. I realized that my vision had shown me the divine feminine aspect of the Godhead, once worshipped as the Holy Spirit in the first temple in Jerusalem. In my latest book, The Dream of the Cosmos, I defined the feminine as a totally different worldview or paradigm of reality, one that regards this planet as part of a sacred cosmic order, whose precious life we are here to serve. It also stands for a totally different perspective on life, a perspective which recognizes that our human lives participate in this divine presence, and that our role as humans is to wake up from our dream of control over the planet and begin to care for its life. Like the Sleeping Beauty, the soul of humanity is stirring to life from a 4,000-year-old long sleep. The feminine archetype is coming back into our consciousness as a new image of the sacred, bringing with it a new revelation, a new story, symbolized in this painting by my husband, of the figure of a woman standing in the tree of life, holding a child. As this great evolutionary impulse gathers momentum, our rational left hemispheric mind is beginning to reconnect with our long neglected soul. What, in its deepest archetypal sense, does the word feminine mean in today's world? It stands for the arduous creation of a new kind of civilization and a new kind of human, one who has a conscious relationship with the cosmos and a profound respect for the divine laws which order it. The feminine is summed up in this statement by a council of the indigenous people of North America. All life is sacred. We come into life as sacred beings. When we abuse the sacredness of life, we affect all creation. Awakening to the feminine requires a receptivity not only to the events occurring in the external world, but to the long ignored voice of the soul and the spirit of the depths that speaks to us through dreams and visions, through intuitions, and through its longing for relationship with us. The soul communicates mainly through the heart, through our deepest feelings, many of which are denied expression in our culture. It also communicates through visionary and participatory experience that Mary Jane and Peter have so beautifully described. There are immense opportunities in this time of transformation, but also immense dangers, for the very transforming power of the feminine activates deep fear of change and evokes the response of reactionary forces which seek to reassert or maintain control over our lives. We tread a path which is on the knife edge between the conscious integration of this new vision on the one hand, and social disintegration and regression into barbarism, perhaps the virtual annihilation of our species on the other. The most ancient symbol of the feminine, going back to Egyptian civilization, is the rose that we can find exalted in the great rose windows of Chartres Cathedral. Which is itself a hymn to the divine feminine. The divine feminine is returning to us now as we face the greatest challenge we've ever had to face: how to birth the understanding that life is one, that we are all connected to each other, that we are all immortal children of the sacred being we have called God, participants in the source from which we have come and to which we will return. Now, I've tried to define the highest values of the divine feminine, the values of the heart, as wisdom, compassion, love, justice and truth, relationship and service, the instinct to heal, nurture, protect, and cherish. Our culture has forgotten these values, but they are returning through the inspired work of many thousands, even millions of individuals all over the world. The call goes out to the world to speak with one voice on behalf of these values, on behalf of life, on behalf of love, for the precious life of the earth on which all our lives depend. Love and wisdom need to become the keystone of a new civilization. Now, I'm showing this image of the late Queen because she embodied in her long reign both love and wisdom in the service of her people and those of the Commonwealth. And I think for the world as a whole, she truly embodied the feminine principle or archetype. The two rainbows that Peter mentioned that appeared over Westminster and Windsor as thousands of people gathered to pay tribute to her marked the passing of a great soul from our planet. Now, a door has been opening onto this new consciousness over the last 50 or so years, bringing together a multitude of individuals and initiatives that are creating the new bottles to hold the new wine. In the West, Pierre de Chardin and Father Bede Griffiths were forerunners of this new consciousness. Incredible new insight about the life of the planet and the effect we've had on its species has been brought to us by Sir David Attenborough. We have access to ancient wisdom traditions like the Vedas and the Upanishads and the teachings of the Taoist sages. Truths that were known thousands of years ago are being rediscovered. Indigenous prophecies and beliefs are being communicated to us. Astrological insights, Peruvian shamanic trainings, and hundreds of teachers bringing healing to body and soul through dozens of outstanding courses have been offered by organizations in America like the Shift Network and Humanities Team, working to awaken our human consciousness. The HeartMath Institute has discovered the importance of the heart as a vital center of consciousness. All these things are streaming out into the world, really, avenues of healing, if people can hear them and respond to them. Now, the artists of the Renaissance were visionaries. This is a visionary painting. I've put this painting of Tobias and the Angel Raphael by Verrocchio here because I love it and because I know that much of what I have just described is coming to us from divine guidance. There are courses on how to connect with loved ones who have left this world and how to connect with the help and guidance that is available to us from higher dimensions. People are receiving messages from distant stars like Sirius, Arcturus, and the Pleiades. Among those received was this one, which I don't know where it came from. Those that have gone since the earth was first people live on. They now hold speech with those who still inhabit the earth plane, as we may do when we join them if conditions are right. As communication is improved, there will be a better understanding and finer development as we come to know this law. And there's something called soul phone that's being developed, a means of actually telephoning to the people who pass beyond, which I think is a wonderful idea. It's coming along quite nicely. Materialist science wouldn't approve of anything that I'm saying, but never mind. Now, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has been one of the greatest teachers of this time, and Sri Ramana and Paramhansa Yogananda were two others who had a great influence in the last century. I still reread Autobiography of a Yogi for inspiration and guidance, and I visited Sri Ramana's ashram in 1956 and pondered his great question, who am I? For decades, until I was able to answer it. Teachers from the East, like Thich Nhat Hanh, have come to the West, establishing Buddhist communities and practices of meditation. And many people from the West have traveled to India to be taught there by great teachers and have come back to transmit what they learned to others. Transcendental meditation, introduced by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, has millions of followers worldwide. And I think that all this might be called the activation of the sacred. Sri Aurobindo, one of the greatest Indian sages, whose life was so beautifully described to us by Matthias Cornelissen, wrote these words in his book, The Life Divine. If it be true that spirit is involved in matter and apparent nature is secret God, then the manifestation of the divine in himself and the realization of God within and without are the highest and most legitimate aim possible to man upon earth. I think that is just an amazing statement because it sums it all up so clearly, what we have to realize. Now, another of the bottles holding the new wine is the near-death experience and the realization that the death of the physical body is not the end of consciousness. This new wine began to appear in the last century when the psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gathered thousands of these experiences through her work with the dying and published groundbreaking books showing that there is no death for the soul. In this century, Anita Moorjani has told of her cure from terminal cancer in her book, Dying to Be Me. And a man called Jeffrey Mishlove has recently won the $5,000 Bigelow Institute Prize for his essay on the survival of the soul. Dr. Eben Alexander has told his extraordinary story in 2 books and given a course for the Shift Network on what he learned. And as a result of his experience, he has written, the old paradigm of birth to death represents an outdated concept that is woefully inadequate in defining the unfolding reality of expanded awareness. Materialist science is at the end of its days, as most scientists are changing their views. The old concepts are soon to be relegated to the same dustbin as the earth is flat, as we develop a more mature understanding and transcend old beliefs. Witnesses to the all-embracing light they see and the unconditional love they experience comes from the descriptions of the thousands of people who have had a near-death experience, but also out-of-body ones. One such account moved and impressed me deeply. It is the visionary experience of a man called Mellon Thomas Benedict, who described what happened to him during the hours after he had clinically died of cancer for several hours. He describes the journey he took into the light and how the light answered his questions and took him on a cosmic journey deeper and deeper into itself. I have, with his permission, included his journey as an appendix to my book, The Dream of the Cosmos, in the hope that it will inspire others. His experience offers a message of hope for humanity, delivered with a joy and clarity that is astonishing and authentic. Now, there are 4 questions that neither religion nor science have answered, the ones I mentioned in the beginning. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where do we go when we die? And why are we here on this planet? Now, there is one extraordinary book written by an emeritus professor who taught philosophy and religious studies at an American university that helps to answer some of these questions. He is a friend of mine, and I'm going to quote from him. He embarked on a 20-year journey into the mind of the cosmos, taking carefully controlled and recorded psychedelic drugs to accomplish this. His name is Christopher Bache, and his book is called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. The original title he wanted for his book was Diamonds from Heaven. Taken in stages through the enormous suffering humanity has endured on its heroic journey, and experiencing this suffering multiple times himself, He was given many visions by the consciousness or intelligence of the cosmos, who initiated him into these experiences and whom he calls the beloved. I will read some of them to you because I think they are important. I was brought to an encounter with a unified energy field underlying all physical existence. I was confronting an enormous field of blindingly bright, incredibly intense energy. This energy was the single energy that comprised all existence. As I moved deeper into it, all borders fell away. All appearances of division were ultimately illusory. No boundaries between incarnations, between human beings, between species, even between matter and spirit. The world of individuated existence was not collapsing into an amorphous mass, as it might sound, but rather was revealing itself to be an exquisitely diversified manifestation of a single entity. Though these experiences were extraordinary in their own right, the most poignant aspect was not the discovered dimensions of the universe themselves, but what my seeing and understanding them meant to the consciousness I was with. It seemed so pleased to have someone to show its work to. I felt that it had been waiting for billions of years for embodied consciousness to evolve, to the point where we could at last begin to see, understand, and appreciate what had been accomplished. I felt the loneliness of this intelligence, having created such a masterpiece and having no one to appreciate its work. And I wept. I wept for its isolation and in awe of the profound love which had accepted this isolation as part of a larger plan. Behind creation lies a love of extraordinary proportions, and all of existence is an expression of this love. The intelligence of the universe's design is equally matched by the depth of love that inspired it. Just when Western culture had convinced itself that the entire universe was a machine, that it moves with a machine's precision and a machine's blindness, the ability to experience the inner life of the universe is being given back to us. The entire human endeavor has been emptied of existential purpose and significance because it has been judged to be a product of blind chance. When one gains access to the inner experience of the universe, however, one learns that far from being an accident, our conscious presence here is the result of a supreme and heroic effort. Far from living our lives unnoticed in a distant corner of an insentient universe, we are everywhere surrounded by orders of intelligence beyond reckoning. This is the last one. I saw humanity climbing out of a valley, and just ahead, on the other side of the mountain peak and beyond our present sight, was a brilliant, sun-drenched world that was about to break over us. The time frame was enormous. After millions of years of struggle and ascent, we were poised on the brink of a sunrise that would forever change the conditions of life on this planet. All current structures would quickly become irrelevant. All truths would quickly be rendered passé. Truly, a new epoch was dawning. The lives of everyone living on the edge of this pivotal time in history had been helping to bring about this global shift. Now, the great teachers who have come to this planet from the higher reaches of the cosmos have spoken of our divine immortal nature. Interesting Freudian slip there. Our divine immortal nature and the path to the experience of it. Great mystics like Hildegard of Bingen and Meister Eckhart, and great poets like Rumi and Kabir have had that experience. 100 years ago, Richard Morris Buck wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness, in which he predicted that this experience would become accessible to many in the future. Now, I think one of the problems with Christianity, they didn't teach people that they had divinity within their nature, the kingdom of heaven, the pearl of great price. They concentrated on belief rather than transformation. And I think this has been our problem for 2000 years. I think we can look to physicists and cosmologists as the new visionaries. Like Bernard yesterday, he wants to move beyond where we are at present, and to the astounding view of the universe offered by Hubble and the new James Webb telescope. This image from 3 days ago from that telescope shows a new star forming. What we are being shown seems miraculous and numinous. The astounding discoveries of quantum physics reveal that we are deeply and indissolubly connected to the life of the planet and the life of the universe. I'm going to come now to two outstanding cosmologists and physicists. One of them is Jude Currivan. Dr. Jude Currivan is one of the new visionaries whose field of exploration is the inner life of the cosmos. In her new book, The Story of Gaia, which has just been published, she explores the evolutionary journey of our conscious planet and our own gradual emergence as self-aware members of our planetary home. She describes the universe as a unified and innately sentient entity. And she explains how mind and consciousness are not what we possess, but what we and the whole world are. She reveals our universe as a great thought of cosmic mind, manifesting as a cosmic hologram of enfolded information that exists to evolve. She says that the universe emerged as a big breath, not a big bang, and explains how evolution is not driven by random occurrences and mutations, but by profoundly resonant and harmonic interplays of forces and influences, each intelligently informed and guided. She's been a friend of mine for many years, and we once gave a webinar together, me with my own material and she with hers. So I think this is a great moment to have the publication of her book come out. And now we come to Nassim, who is not a friend, but I have a tremendous admiration for him. And he says, a new cosmology is being born, a new vision of our profound relationship with an intelligent, living, and interconnected universe. Now, 9 years ago, I did a course with him at the Resonance Academy, which is now the Resonance Science Foundation. And as a result of that, I gave a lecture at Dartington Hall in Devonshire in 2015, in which I give much more than I can give you tonight. But it was just a revelation, absolutely marvelous experience to go through that course, even though I'm not a scientist and I'm certainly not a mathematician. Anyway, I learned a lot. So the new story, as I said, is also coming from Nassim. He's about to present to the scientific community a 200-page paper holding thousands of equations, which is the fruit of decades of research, showing how quantum theory and relativity theory can be reconciled. I think Bernard mentioned this last night, saying how difficult it was to do. He has recently discovered the missing piece to complete his theory. He compares the astounding recent scientific discoveries to the unfolding of the petals of a rose. He believes that the revelation of our profound connection to the deepest ground of life and to each other could have a powerful effect on how we live our lives, how we relate to the planet, and how we interact with each other, recognizing that our every act and even our every thought has an effect on the underlying intelligent field. This is me speaking. Unified physics tells us that the whole universe is a unified field, a cosmic web of life which connects all life forms in our universe and on our planet. Every atom of life interacts with every other atom, no matter how great the distance between them. None of us is truly separate from others or from other species of life on this planet, or from the life of the 2 trillion galaxies of the universe. The soul, I think, is the cosmic sea of being or subtle field underlying and connecting all aspects of reality. Unified field cosmology shows us that the material world exists within a stupendous field of consciousness that is the ground state of the universe. Our human consciousness is part of the consciousness which sustains not only our world, but the entire universe. Each one of us carries the holographic imprint of the universe within us. The alchemist said, all that is without is also within you. They knew that 4 or 5 centuries ago. No matter what our race, nation, gender, or caste, each one of us is part of the living, breathing, connecting web of life, which underlies and connects all life forms in the universe and on our planet. I call this web of life the soul of the cosmos. I prefer the word soul to mind because it carries a feminine resonance, but I absolutely respect that Bernard and many other scientists call it mind. And they also use the scientific term field for it. Quantum physics tells us that our world of matter is like a visible foam resting on a very deep ocean of light that permeates every cell of our physical being. We are not only connected with each other through the astonishing reach of the internet, but through the infinitesimal particles of subatomic matter that are non-locally connected with each other throughout the entire universe. In our essence, we are beings of light, cosmic beings, incarnated many times on this planet for an evolutionary purpose. All life at the deepest level is essentially one, and each one of us is an expression of that one, inseparable from it. These discoveries challenge the assumption that we humans are the only conscious beings in a universe that is without life, intelligence, purpose, or meaning. In the nick of time, we are moving from a story of a dead, insentient universe to a universe that is vibrantly alive and the ground of all that we call life. The old image of God as a distant male creator in a place called heaven is undergoing an alchemical transformation. God or spirit can be redefined as the invisible ground of the entire manifest universe and the ground of our own consciousness. Divine mind is not something separate or distant from us. We are within it, coexisting and co-creating with it. This, to me, is one of the great revelations of our time. If God or spirit is the intelligence and creative energy of the life process itself, pulsing forth at every instant in every region of this vast universe, then how we treat so-called inanimate matter, planetary life, and each other becomes a matter of how we are treating God. In splitting the atom and creating weapons of mass destruction, and in killing others who are our soul brothers and sisters, we are mutilating and desecrating the body of God. Now, I want briefly to summarize the quintessence of Nassim Haramein's discoveries, not in mathematical equations, but in words that you can understand. He says that beneath the visible universe is an underlying electromagnetic field or matrix, like a fabric woven of energy, or a lattice or a web. There is no such thing as empty space. Space is full and it is seething with energy. And he says that we cannot separate consciousness from this field because the field is consciousness, imprinting, exchanging, and transmitting information every nanosecond. Consciousness orders and organizes the field and its complex interconnected systems at all levels and the evolution of the universe itself. And we are part of this stupendous organization of energy, part of that consciousness. We cannot really separate so-called inanimate matter, animating self-organizing systems like plants and animals, and self-aware organisms like ourselves. All may come to be seen as integrated components of a continuous evolutionary path of information or consciousness, growing and unfolding through what we call time. The entirety of space-time is full of fields, from the electromagnetic field of a single atom to that of each cell in our body, to the heart's electromagnetic field, to the fields of the Earth, the Sun, and the 2 trillion galaxies. The whole of what we call space is full of electromagnetic fields of different magnitudes interacting with each other, Even the atom is a field, and the proton and electron within it are also fields. This diagram shows the extent of the electromagnetic field of the heart, which is connected to the electromagnetic field of the earth when we are in tune with our heart. And the Heart Math Institute teaches us how to become in tune with the heart. Now he says there are 100 trillion cells. Some people would think they're 50 trillion, but I won't argue with this, in our body, and 100 trillion atoms in every one of these 100 trillion cells. Each one of these atoms contains a proton. Each proton contains trillions of Planck units. Everything is connected through these Planck units. The size of a Planck unit is like a grain of sand compared to the size of the whole universe. Untold numbers of these electromagnetic oscillators constitute the ground of the material universe. All so-called matter is made out of protons and these infinitesimal Planck units. These basic particles in the field are oscillating and vibrating so rapidly that there is no apparent space between them. This electromagnetic oscillation is the ground state of the universe. This continuous oscillation is so rapid that it makes matter appear to us as a steady state. All these Planck units, protons, atoms, and cells are connected to each other and to every observer in the universe, forming a stupendous field of energy in a continuous state of oscillation. They produce a holographic structure and a dynamic wormhole-like network which connects all points across scales, generating a connected living universe. And I should say that for Nassim, the whole field of this exploration, his exploration, is sacred. So coming to the end now, I've said that the divine spirit is the core of our being, and the soul is the intermediary between spirit and body. The body is the temple of the soul and the means of our being able to incarnate on this planet. At the same time, it offers us access to the many dimensions of the inner universe, as the great sages of India have taught us, and relationship with the divine spirit that ensouls it. The more we develop love and reverence for life, the more we will be in touch with this Holy Spirit within and around us. The new story is about relinquishing the fear of death, knowing that we survive death, that we are in our essence immortal cosmic beings whose life continues beyond the death of the physical body. I think Hieronymus Bosch must have known this. So the new story tells us that cosmic light and love are the source of all life and the foundation of our being, our consciousness, our creativity, and our capacity for love. So imagine this revelation being born in your heart, unfolding like the petals of a rose. If the whole universe is one integrated living organism, one symphony of cosmic sound, then we are part of that whole. We participate as co-creators in the unfolding of our life in this miraculous evolutionary process. At the heart of the cosmos is a love of unimaginable dimensions, a love that sustains the entire universe and is the origin of our own capacity to love and to create. To feel embraced by this love could enable us to heal the pathology of the past, all the terrible traumas that we carry within our collective psyche, which cause us to repeat the habits of the past and the mistakes of the past, and to replace fear and doubt with trust and joy. And I think that to know this, to know all this, is the secret longing of the life that lives us. So thank you very much for your patience. I'll now disengage.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne, for your wonderful presentation. I can see already from when we took a break, there were some really wonderful messages towards your presentation. So thank you very much for it. So when we did break, we had Chris with his hand up. Did you want to come in?
Thank you. And once again, your message is so impressive. But I wondered if you could unravel a paradox for me. You mentioned the journey of the hero, and it appears to me that there are kind of two directions for this journey. In the case of most of the pre-Socratic stories about descent into hell, Hades, the journey was towards the depths. And I think this is echoed in Jung's journey. Whereas Plato talks about the cave and the journey is in the opposite direction, towards the light. The hero goes up to the light and then comes back. Would you be able to say something about that apparent paradox?
Yes, it may have belonged to the particular time when you mentioned the pre-Socratics going down into Hades, but they also went, if you read Parmenides, if you read Peter Kingsley, they went for an encounter with the goddess, which doesn't come through unless you read Kingsley. You don't know about that.
Yes, I read that.
In the Dark Places of Wisdom. Have you read that one?
Yes.
And have you read the other one about Pythagoras?
No, I haven't read that one.
Well, that's interesting too. Anyway, I can't really, my mind isn't really clever enough to answer your question properly. All I can say that Jung certainly had a terrifying descent into the depths, but I think that he had to do that in a way on behalf of the whole culture. It was a kind of, rather like Chris Bache also taking that psychedelic journey, something done on behalf of the collective, that he could bring back from the depths the wisdom that we had forgotten, the wisdom that we'd lost, and the connection that we'd lost with those depths. And it was terrifying, and it terrified him, and he thought he might be having a schizophrenic descent sort of thing. So I can't really explain it more than that, but I'm glad you brought it up because it's an interesting, it is an interesting paradox. But on the whole, people, I think, have more opportunity to make the descent without going through what Jung did. So I would not deny them the possibility of doing that journey.
Christopher Bache, your description of Christopher Bache's journey is interesting because he seems to kind of combine the journey towards the light and the journey towards the terrifying.
Yes, he does. He does. He had to go through the terror and he had to go through the suffering. But at each stage, he had to re-experience whatever degree of suffering he was able to stand. And then he was shown the deeper journey into the light that the beloved showed him, so to speak. It was in stages over 20 years, not all at once like Jung did. In very slow stages, very carefully controlled, with his wife sitting beside him. Sorry?
It needs a brave person.
He was very, very brave. Yeah. Is very brave, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next, I'd like to invite Bernard, who was speaking to us yesterday.
Oh, thank you.
Bernard.
Oh, hi there, Anne, and thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And I might say, incidentally, that when I gave my presentation with Alex yesterday, we didn't have time to do the final part, which is going to be called the return of the sacred. But actually, there was no need because you have said so beautifully some of the thoughts that we would have discussed if we'd had time. So thank you so much for that. I have a specific question, though. I was very intrigued when you talked about the 3 ages, which you described as the lunar age, I think, and the age of the sun, and the stellar age, which you described as the final one. And I'd just like to elaborate a bit on that because I'm personally very interested in the different levels of consciousness which exist in the universe. And the human consciousness, planetary consciousness, if you like, solar consciousness, galactic consciousness, and maybe cosmic consciousness. So I see there as being a hierarchy of consciousness, because that fits in with my own sort of theoretical approach. And so what I'm really saying is that your third stage, which you're talking about, the final stage, I would imagine that it can be subdivided into different stages, because, for example, I personally believe that it's only a matter of time before we make contact with, extraterrestrial intelligence. I mean, as an astronomer, I think it's almost there's bound to be other civilizations out there. It's just a question of whether we have contact with them. And as you say, there's some people who claim to have contact anyway. But the point is, when we make formal contact in a way which, current science would, respect and appreciate, it seems to me that we will inevitably, go collectively into a sort of galactic level of consciousness. Now we have a planetary level of consciousness because of all technological developments in the last century. It seems to be a matter of time before we become part of a galactic level of consciousness, and maybe then even a cosmic level of consciousness. And I don't know when that's going to happen. It might be tomorrow, it might be 100 years, but it does seem to me it's likely to happen. So I'm fascinated in how would you modify your description of the three ages to account for that? I don't know what it would mean in terms of the male-female thing, because obviously you were relating your three phases to the male-female roles, but how would you react to this idea that you've got more than three?
Well, I think I would agree with you. There are definitely going to be levels and layers of different kinds of consciousness as we connect with different aspects of the cosmos. Nassim says that it shouldn't be too long, because a different way of connecting with the vacuum will enable us to travel far distant distances than we can't at the moment, but we'll be able to do it with this new form of energy. I know you met him, but I don't think you've been in contact with him since. So maybe if you got in contact, he could tell you about the form of energy that could be developed, which was enable us to travel to these distant galaxies.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading his 200-page paper, which I haven't seen.
No, he hasn't put it in yet, but it's coming in. But I think we have to look at the way you said it, really, in stages and degrees. The stellar consciousness, which the alchemist referred to, was really the union with the divine ground. But then what happens when you're within that, and when you've reached that stage, and then you move on to the galactic consciousness and whatever is beyond, that is fascinating. And perhaps we'll come back and we'll be able to experience that.
I think what is interesting is that, I think there are already beings who are in contact with those other levels of consciousness, the solar, the galactic, and even the cosmic level of consciousness. I believe, that's what mystical experience involves.
Yes.
But the point is that more scientific, if you like, materialistic technology, such as Nazim refers to, is also going to make contact with those other levels of, higher consciousness, if you like, but it will be through not a mystical channel, but through a more physical channel, in the sense that it's represented, appreciated by what would be called mainstream physics, although by that stage it wouldn't be physics as we normally understand it. So I think that's so important, because this is how this new paradigm of physics will come about. It will merge in some sense with the more mystical type experience.
Yes, I think it will. I think it will, but it will take time, obviously, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, it may be thousands of years.
I don't think it will be as long as that, but it certainly will be, I should think, 1,000 years. But because the technology will have to be developed, and at the moment we haven't got the instruments to develop the technology, I don't think.
Yeah. What does that mean in terms of male and female? Because you put a lot of emphasis on that. So will we have transcended that division by the time we get to the galactic level?
I think we're transcending it now. I think those the stages, the lunar thing was the great mother, the solar thing was the great father, but with that image of the sacred marriage, I think that's what we're moving into now, that men and women are coming together. They're no longer divided. women are no longer controlled and put down by men, except in Afghanistan and Iran and, you know, various places in the world, but they aren't in our country. So that's progress. And certainly we have to, together, I think that with women's intuition and her connection with the heart and men's development of the mind and the intellect, the two together can create something extraordinary. And I think that probably in the future, there will be women astrophysicists, or more like, well, like Jude. Jude has worked all her life because she had childhood experiences which showed her the higher dimensions of the universe when she was 5 or 6. And it's taken her a lifetime to be able to integrate those childhood experiences with her knowledge as a scientist and a physicist.
Yeah,
but
well,
I think your ideas are fascinating, Bernard, and you must go on trying to get beyond what you were saying yesterday, which was so interesting. And I loved your Ouroboros image. And I nearly took the scream from, copied the scream and put it into my talk. And then I put the frogs instead.
Oh, well, I'm happy to send you a copy. You can use the frogs and the Ouroboros by it. Anyway, thank you so much, Anne.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for coming in. Next, I'd like to a question coming from the chat, which reads, Ian McIlgrath spoke of belonging as an aspect of longing, and in Kingsley's translation of Parmenides' poem, the pre-Socratic philosopher, said that it was longing that enabled him to travel into the underworld to meet the goddess. As a therapist, and I would personally like to also hear in relation to your cycles that you just discussed with Bernard, could you comment on the role of suffering as a prelude to enlightenment?
That's too difficult. I think that one could leave that to Christopher Bache, the suffering that he had to go through on the process of being enlightened. But we've always been told that we have to suffer. And I think this is a huge mistake. We have suffered and we are suffering. Look at the world at the moment. But the kind of suffering that we've been having, which we've brought on ourselves, we don't need to suffer anymore, so to speak. That in itself would be an enlightenment if we knew that we didn't have to go on with our wars and our cruelties. That would be a big change, because it would relieve us of a huge amount of suffering and trauma. And we could heal the traumas that we already carry, that we repeat all the time, sort of thing. But I don't think one should say that suffering is necessary as a prelude to enlightenment. I think there's a lovely actual account of a cosmic consciousness experience in Richard Buck's book, Cosmic Consciousness, where he was driving home after a meeting with friends, and he suddenly had this experience of just being in the consciousness of the universe and knowing that everything would be all right. And he didn't have to suffer anything to experience that. He just experienced it. And some people do have the great blessing of experiencing, or a Kundalini experience or something like that. So I wouldn't ever make that a categorical rule of any kind, that we have to suffer in order to be enlightened.
Are you saying then that we're suffering too much and not enlightened?
Yeah, we're suffering unnecessarily. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And thank you for that question in the chat. Next, I'd like to invite Kathleen.
Thank you, James. Anne, I bow to you for everything you said. I feel it in my entire viscerality. One of your comments that you made that struck me is each one of us is carrying a holographic imprint that is the same as that imprint of the universe. And at the risk of sounding like I'm promoting something, which I'm not, I absolutely 100% know that, because 20 years ago, I had an experience that had me literally start connecting the dots and drawing that blueprint, which is in use today, both as it is a universal, dynamic, multi-dimensional blueprint that I cannot explain. And therein lies my question. One of the challenges of the feminine is the absence of explanation as we currently know it. It's part of the transcendence, is the acceptance of that that resonance and marriage of polarity are those need to be allowed, if you will, for that to occur. And so I would like if you could comment on how, from the aspect of the feminine, how these dots get connected, and yet not necessarily through scientific research, but just from presence and availability, and if we're lucky, our ability to connect those and put them into words and language, etc. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Well, I think you've answered your own question because you've just stated it, and it's something that can be done, and that we'll move towards it, and it will gradually unfold as we understand more. But when you look at the state of knowledge of our culture, when you look at the newspapers and the media and the television, the level of what they're giving us is so incredibly superficial. There's no depth allowed. There's no questions asked. Even in the book reviews, the books that they choose to review are always ones about whatever is happening in the world, but they're not books that go into depth, like Ian's, for instance. Who is going to read Ian's on that level, from that level of people? So it's going to take time for Ian's ideas to percolate through the collective, and it's being spread by other people, sort of, to explain what he's writing about and everything. And he's also doing a lot of webinars himself, which people can watch. So I think that we just have to be patient, come back another lifetime and see what's happened. And
You're not the first person that said that.
Thank you for your question, but I really do think you've answered it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Let's go to Todd next.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anne, for the wisdom and experience you bring to this forum, but also to the aid that brings to sort of the great turning of humanity. I think we all share some of the despair, what we look around us, the heedless blindness, and the direction we think it's going. But I also am in great awe of the conclusions that Mr. Beish came to, you know, the rigor and the intrepidness that brought him to bring back wisdom. My path concludes somewhat where his does, without all the pain and the ardor and the rigor that he experienced. But I also share with you, and I hope many others here, an optimism, because we're at a point of turning. And when I talk to younger people, they have the reason for the greater despair because they're looking over the edge into the abyss. But when you explain to them and talk to them and say that you are actually at one of the most magnificent points in human history thus far, their eyes get bigger and they engage more. And to me, that's just a treasure to say, we've come a long way, but the edge we're looking over is not the end. And so when I talk to young people and express it in that ways, there's an engagement and a joy and a privilege just to watch that. So thank you for what you added to that. But if we all talk to those that are coming next and say, not that you have this, but it's going to get better because it can and it will. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's very important, because you mustn't tell young people, give them the gloomy view that I had in my first part of the lecture, but give them hope and trust, because I'm absolutely sure that this planet is being guided and helped. So we're not alone. We are absolutely not alone. And if you can tell them that, give them trust in themselves and say that things will unfold as they go on through their lives. And they have to do the best they can with the gifts they have, and find an avenue of expression for their gifts. That's terribly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Next, let's go to Victoria.
Can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. And your presentation is so integrative and so riveting and so activating. And I want to go back to one of the comments that you quoted from Christopher Beish about his experience in his journey, about the loneliness of creation, waiting for us to discover how magnificent and decades ago, I had an experience doing a practice that was natural Qigong movement. I was learning. And in that practice, I experienced such a movement of energy in my body that was so activating. I remember I was in the middle of a group of people and I whispered the words, "Thank you, God," just whispered it at kind of below my breath while I was doing the practice in a group of people. And I distinctly heard, "No, thank you."
How fascinating. Yeah.
And at that moment, I felt like I understood that creation is alive and intelligent and needs us, because of our embodiment and being in form, to help evolve creation. And that creation was, the consciousness running creation was somehow letting me know that we're needed. We're actually needed for this process. And so with that experience in mind, connecting with what you quoted from Christopher Beish today, I wondered whether you yourself have any practices you use that you could share to cultivate this sense of participation in beloved, collaboration with creation.
You've put it all so beautifully. I haven't got any. My way of connecting is writing. When I'm writing, I'm in touch. Even and speaking this talk, I know I'm in touch. I feel the presence sort of there with me and around me. But I have no specific exercises or rituals or things that I do. I do talk to the Holy Spirit, and I have very bad tinnitus in one ear, and I was lying awake at 5 o'clock in the morning the other day with this very, very loud roaring in my ear, and I said to the Holy Spirit, "For God's sake, do something. I can't stand it." And I fell asleep, and I went into when I was in my dream, so to speak, I went into an upper room, a wooden sort of house, a floor. I could hear this marvelous music, like Speminalium, like the one you heard at the beginning, coming from this upper floor. And I went up some steps, and there were 3 young men holding music in their hands and singing this marvelous, marvelous music. So that is the only recent experience I've had, but I wasn't trying to have it. I just said, "I can't stand this any longer, do something." And she did, because she is a she, because I know who she is and everything through that dream. So I would advise you just to go on with whatever you're doing and just talk to the universe, talk to the beloved and say, we are the bridge between Earth and the cosmos. The human species is the bridge. So if you know yourself as that, see yourself as a bridge, see a bridge going from Earth to the cosmos, maybe travel on it, and then talk to the beloved. Do things that come to you in the imagination like that. I think that Ian would be very pleased, because it would be activating the right hemisphere.
I love that suggestion. And actually, I do see myself as a bridge between heaven and earth. So that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Anne, are you happy to take maybe one more question?
Any more?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a question, yes. If you were happy to have one more, but it comes from the chat, which reads, Anne, do you see the current exploration of gender definition, particularly among adolescents now, as part of a growing consciousness of a unity of male and female?
I think that is such a confused and confusing issue that I don't want to get into it, because it's something that's come up quite fairly recently, say the last 10, 15 years like that. There's huge controversy about it, huge anger, huge bitterness, and huge maltreatment of children, I think, changing their genders when they're too young to know what's happening. So I feel very strongly about it. And I think that something is probably happening to do with this change of consciousness, but it's being taken at the literal level instead of at the transcendental level, if you like, being understood as a symptom of the need to change all our understanding of absolutely everything, including the relationships between men and women, women and women, men and men, the whole lot. But to get stuck in it is a huge mistake, because it just creates anger, bitterness, and hatred. and we want to get out of that.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Anne, anyway. We are on top of the hour, so I guess we should sort of start wrapping up. And I would like to bring it back to you and see if you have any sort of final remarks you would like to give us before we close.
No, except that it's a great privilege to be included in this series, and I'm very honored and happy about it. And I think this is my last talk because I'm going to be 91 on Friday, and I think I'm old enough now to keep quiet and just not say any more. I've said enough, and I've done what I can. I've done what I came to do on this planet. I think that we're meeting up now, all of us who have been incarnated at this time. I know that David Lorimer feels this, and I know he's on the call. We're here to work together to create this new consciousness in whatever way we can in our own individual lives. So I feel privileged to be part of this, part of the scientific and medical network also, part of friendship with people like Chris Beisch and Richard Tarnas, very close friends. So, but I can see that we all incarnated to get together and to communicate with each other. So that has been a very great blessing. So thank you for inviting me. I'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Well, I mean, if this really is the last presentation, it has been a privilege to have you. I know everyone here really appreciated your presentation, but we do also encourage you to keep going. I can see already in the chat, there's
I probably will.
For more.
Anyway, I'm going to have a rest now until after Christmas.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much, Anne, and of course, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Just before we go, I'd just like to invite you all to next week's sessions, where on Saturday we will have David Lorimer talking about recovering a sense of the sacred and evolutionary imperative. And on Sunday, we will have Jeremy Lent talking about weaving a web of meaning, how recognizing our deep interrelatedness lays a path to sustainable flourishing. Also, we have another session on Wednesday. We have a different series. This is the Future Scientist. We have another installment of that series where Alex Gomez-Marin will be in conversation with Dr. Jordi Piggum, where amongst other things, they will be talking about scientism, post-materialism, and consciousness. It is a free event, so there is more information on our website, so I do encourage you all to go to that. Yes, thank you all again. Thank you so much, Anne, and we'll see you again soon here at the Power Center.